团结台湾同胞。
On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, breakthroughs in cross-strait relations, milestones over 40 years since the message of peaceful reunification to Taiwan compatriots. A tribute to China's elder scholars through the lens of a young photographer. Why are the pictures worth 1,000 words?
Draw their attention on all those masters.
And an unflinching look at China's millennials, the restless generation, and how they can change the country and the world with a young American author. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. 40 years ago, on New Year's Day, 1979, China's top lawmaking body issued a letter to the people of Taiwan officially declaring the mainland's policy of peaceful reunification. 40 years later, China is commemorating that history-changing moment and mapping the future road for cross-strait relations. Take a look.
It's not just a policy address. President Xi Jinping's speech is filled with emotional appeals to the people of Taiwan.
台湾是中国一部分。
Nobody or no party can negate the natural attachment and national identity shared by people of the two sides, featuring our deep blood bonds and affinity to each other. Nobody or no party can stop the trend of the times that a Taiwan Strait situation will march towards peace and stability, and that a cross-strait relationship will move forward constructively. Nobody or no party can ever resist the historical trend of a country empowering itself, national rejuvenation, and reunification of the two sides of the Taiwan Strait.
National rejuvenation is a key term repeatedly invoked by President Xi ever since he came into office. But rejuvenation does not just mean revival on the mainland. Xi made it clear that this aim cannot be achieved without reunification with Taiwan.
在中华民族走向伟大复兴的进程中
For the Chinese people who are striding towards the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, the Taiwan compatriots would not be absent. Compatriots on the mainland and Taiwan should join hands, realize the Chinese dream, and take responsibility together for national rejuvenation and share the glory of national rejuvenation. The Taiwan issue was caused by the weakness and chaos of the Chinese nation and will surely be resolved through national rejuvenation.
President Xi also sent a strong message to promoters of Taiwan independence.
中国人不打中国人。
Chinese people would not fight against each other. We are willing to make the greatest and most sincere efforts for the future of peaceful reunification, because achieving peaceful reunification is the most beneficial way for compatriots on both sides of the Taiwan Strait and the whole Chinese nation. We will not promise to give up the use of force, and will reserve the rights to use all necessary measures against the intervention of any outside forces and separatist activities by the very few Taiwan independent separatists, but absolutely not for our Taiwan compatriots.
President Xi reiterated the long-standing policy of one country, two systems as the solution to the issue, an idea first proposed by former leader Deng Xiaoping. The policy says that upon reunification, Taiwan's current social system can continue unchanged and even retain its military.
和平统一之后
After peaceful reunification, Taiwan will forever be peaceful, and its people will live and work in peace and contentment. Having a strong motherland to rely on, the livelihood of our Taiwan compatriots will improve, and they will have more space for development. They will be more assertive and confident in the international community and feel safer and more dignified.
For more on cross-strait relations, we have in Taipei Zheng Youping, a professor from the Department of Public Administration and Policy at Taipei University. In our Beijing studio, Mr. Yang Xiyu, a senior research fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Happy New Year to both of you in Beijing and Taipei.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, sir. Let me start by asking you, Mr. Yang, in Beijing, is there any different this time the speech given by Chinese President Xi Jinping regarding the cross-strait relations compared to the previous ones, both his and his predecessors?
Well, I think the latest speech, on one hand, insists on the long-time position of several generations of Chinese leadership, but on the other hand, offer a wider, more flexible room for exchanges across the strait, and meanwhile, more flexible room for the peaceful unification of our motherland.
Mr. Zheng, Professor, tell us more about what you feel after reading the speech.
After I read the speech, I am deeply moved by President Xi's intention and his firmness. First of all, I have to say that we're all touched by his concern over the well-being of the Taiwanese compatriots here. And not only that, I think he is very firm in telling us that motherland is prepared to continue its pursuit of peaceful reunification between the two sides. Not only that, he also emphasized a very pragmatic approach toward this peaceful reunification. In other words, he's telling us that in the future, he envisions a common market across the Taiwan Strait for the Greater China Circle. And he would like to institutionalize the economic cooperation across the straits. Not only that, he also tells us that he's firmly against the Taiwan independence, the separatist movement, which makes all of us feel a lot more confident that Taiwan and mainland China will sooner or later be reunified. And it is only a matter of time before we see that.
Is it a smart thing to start from market unification in a way, Mr. Yang?
Well, I think market unification has been the major driving force in the long process of the peaceful unification across the strait. However, only by the market, only by economic power, we cannot achieve what we want. So mainly, we need to make more efforts on the other areas, especially the political consultation area, so that we can have more momentum and more powers towards our shared goal of the peaceful unification.
Since you mentioned political consultation, let me go back to some of the phrases that Chinese President Xi Jinping used in his speech. So-called in-depth democratic consultation. That's quite a phrase to be used. Mr. Zheng, from the mainland part, a lot of people give a lot of interpretations to this phrase. From your side, your interpretation of what exactly it meant and it could be meaning in a way to the Taiwan compatriots.
I think what we've read from his speech is that he is ready to start to initiate a democratic consultation across the straits, meaning that he would like to respect opinions and ideas from all sides of the political spectrum in Taiwan. In other words, he's not only ready to interact, to conduct dialogue with any political parties that accepts the 1992 consensus and the One China principle, but he's also willing to take into account, take into considerations from all sides, all the social forces in Taiwan. And I guess that is a very, that's a very encouraging sign, because many people here in Taiwan are a bit concerned whether this kind of reunification talks or political consultation would only be initiated between KMT and CCP. And from what he said today, I guess it's very obvious that it's going to be a very open-minded approach to the dialogues between the two sides.
Professor Zheng, as you may notice, after Chinese President Xi Jinping's speech, the leaders now in Taiwan in Taiwan Island is quite nervous, coming out and talking about so-called the latest election result that does not necessarily mean what she rather prefer not to mean. So you see quite a back and forth between the two sides, Professor Zheng, how do you read the common consensus that can be built for the next step? I mean, giving speech is one thing, but getting things done is another thing. And best the way to get things done is totally a very different logic. So, Professor Zheng, about that part.
I would have to say that from the end result of the 91 local election a few weeks back, we can see that Taiwanese voters are very smart because they realize that by refusing to accept the 1992 consensus, Tsai Ing-wen administration and DPP have not been able to come up with any solid plans to improve Taiwanese well-being. In other words, without the mainland China market, without working with motherland, there is no way for Taiwan to build up another miracle, economic miracle. In other words, we are getting to see the mainstream public opinion in Taiwan gradually shifted toward greater acceptance of the 1992 consensus and the One China principle. The most recent opinion survey shows 61% of the Taiwanese residents are in support of the 1992 consensus. And also, we're looking at a very encouraging sign. The recent poll shows that 46% of college students, younger generations, Taiwanese, are willing to work, study, and even live in mainland China. And that goes to show that greater economic interdependence brings greater social integration and thereby bringing closer the two sides.
Certainly, the policies to encourage more interactions and exchanges across the Taiwan Straits and providing more opportunities for the young people in Taiwan really have been working very well across the Taiwan Strait and for the interest of both. Mr. Yang, though, let me ask you also about the all options remain on the table, which is also a phrase used in the speech. Of course, the Chinese President Xi Jinping said that is not targeting at the people in Taiwan, but rather the separatist, small separatist groups, and also about any foreign interference. So, Mr. Yang, what exactly, how do you interpret all options? If military options have been taken, I mean, that's a big if, that would mean certainly devastating consequences. Mr. Yang, how will the interests of the Taiwan people be protected if that were one of the options?
Well, firstly, if something happened, as you mentioned in the late part about the military option, that would be a disaster, not only for Taiwanese people, but also for the whole Chinese people. Just as we have said repeatedly for decades long, say, Chinese never fight against Chinese. However, all options on the table because there are some unexpected possible scenario. Number one, external interference for the unification process among Chinese people. And number two, a small group of Taiwanese really have been trying to separate Taiwan from the motherland. If either of the case happens, Beijing will have any other better choice to go to the military option so that China can remain in the unification type.
Okay.
So in other words, without the military option, we cannot exclude the possibility or probability of the separation of China.
Professor Zheng, there are two things that we need to mention here just for the context of this specific phrase. One is that you see, if you look at the recent trend of China-U.S. relations, things are not necessarily going to a better direction, but rather causing concern. And the Taiwan issue has been one issue of, shall we say, hot debated areas between the two countries from the very beginning of the start of the relationship 40 years ago. The second thing is the DPP, of course, has been quite surprised, quote unquote, by, as they said, by the latest local election result, and with possible foreign interference, the DPP could take a road of no return. That is also a big concern for many. So given the context, how do you understand the all options, and how shall we avoid, shall we say, the most devastating option?
I would have to say that the United States is very smart in playing the Taiwan card in terms of, or in trying to contain or to obstruct China's rise to a superpower position. Now, obviously, the United States has assigned China the role of a strategic rival. But then, at the same time, we're looking at Donald Trump and his administration trying to work closely with mainland China. In other words, they realize that without China, the United States will not be able to stand alone in the international arena. It needs China's help in managing this complex international political economic system. But at the same time, using Taiwan as a card, as a pawn in the game, is something I think the American government has been doing in the past few years. But here, we know that there is a line in the sand, very clearly marked, the red line that will not be passed. So United States administration has always been very keen to emphasize that one China policy and the free joint communiques are their basis for dealing with mainland China and Taiwan. But unfortunately, in Taiwan, DPP's head, Tsai Ing-wen, thinks otherwise. She thinks that by using the American card, that she'll be able to tear apart the relationship between mainland China and Taiwan. And by doing so, she's trying to create a political opportunity for herself. That's why we are very worried. After losing the local election, Tsai Ing-wen might resort to even more radical approaches in dealing with the cross-Strait issues in 2019, because by radicalizing their positions, by infuriating mainland China, she thinks in her mind that she might be able to gather stronger support from the pro-independence people here in Taiwan. We have to say that she's making a very serious mistake here, because she misjudged Taiwanese people's wisdom. I think most Taiwanese residents today have come to realize that DPP and Tsai Ing-wen are only playing a game that is too dangerous for Taiwan to play.
Mr. Yang, I mean, you are someone that can really speak on this matter. You were working in Washington in the Chinese embassy, dealing with issues related to Taiwan as well at that time. And also, you know that in the year of the Bush administration, Bush Junior, of course, it was during that time that President Bush was talking about the U.S. is against independence of Taiwan. That, of course, has been warmly received from China's mainland. Mr. Yang, if you see the ups and downs of U.S.-China relations and the Taiwan card that various administrations have played over the decades, what do you make of the latest round?
Well, I think during the past 4 decades, U.S. government's policy towards Taiwan, I would say, is mainly stable, but with some fluctuation by playing cards, as you mentioned. But every time they play card, it's always at the crisis or bad shape of the bilateral relation between Beijing and Washington. And in recent period, under the Trump administration, the situation has some different factors. The most important factor is the national power between China and the U.S. is narrowed down, and the U.S. has Trump administration has regarded China as a main strategic rivalry. So with the new background neither of the Democratic and Republican previous presidents faced. With the new background, I think the Washington administration is playing hard more strategically than before. So I'm really worried about the current trend, especially the interactions between Washington and Taipei under the new background.
Professor Zheng and Mr. Yang, we are coming to the last 2 minutes of the show, but thinking about that, the year 2019 is going to be quite a year. Some already predicted that you're going to see the latest trend of China-U.S. relations. You're going to see all factors try to move the things to their advantage, and you will see a lot of turbulence as a result of that. Professor Zheng, from your perspective, how do you see the Taiwan issue in the new year? What should be prepared in order to smoothly get through the year? Professor Zheng, and then later to Mr. Yang, briefly from both of you.
This may be a year of turbulence. Tsai Ing-wen obviously will play even more radical approaches, trying to gather support from among her camp, the pro-independence camp. Meanwhile, we're going to see 15 cities and counties, magistrates and mayors from the KMT camp looking to increase city-to-city exchanges across the straits. That might be a positive sign for all of us, because by promoting more and more city-to-city exchanges, we're going to lay the foundation for a peaceful coexistence between the two sides.
And the last words also coming from Mr. Yang, please.
This year, China-U.S. relation will be able to enjoy more stable shape of the bilateral relation than last year. But a strategic variable is Taiwan, as Professor Zheng mentioned. If China play radical policies by making use of U.S. card, then the U.S.-China relation, meanwhile, the cross-Strait relation will go through turbulences.
Yang Xiyu, Zheng Youpeng, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us for the year 2019. Happy New Year to both of you. Thank you so much. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. A tribute to China's elder scholars through the lens of a young photographer. Why the pictures are worth 1,000 words. And an unflinching look at China's millennials, the restless generation, as they say, and how they can change the country and the world with a young American author. Those interviews right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Today, we bring you two young men who have observed China's old and young generation and have their own way of capturing the essence of the vivid and vibrant life in China. First up is photographer Xiao Mengya. He took pictures of the 26 masters among China's scholars and had a photo exhibit dedicated to these old legends at Peking University. Older generations of Chinese scholars now in twilight of their lives have made remarkable contributions to science and literature. Their spirit, charisma deserve to be well documented and remembered by generations to come.
All take part in history, but few drive its progress. They are the scholars, writers, thinkers, and scientists. Their contributions have shaped the future of the country, and the fruits of their labor have, in one way or another, benefited the world. The foundation they laid down allowed the younger generation to thrive with unprecedented opportunities. One beneficiary is Xiao Mengya, a young man born at the end of the 20th century. He grew up in Beijing, then studied photography in New York. Through his lens, he paid a public tribute to a senior generation of esteemed professors from Peking University, riding on the legacy of the past masters. A generation of proud young Chinese are writing their own legend.
Steve, welcome to CGTN.
It's my pleasure and my honor.
26 academic masters. great masters from China. It must be quite a project.
Yeah, it's a big project. I got a lot of help from my family and my friends.
No wonder you were raised up in Beida, in Peking University, right?
Yeah, I spent my childhood in Beida. Some of the professors, the masters, I've been worked by, but I didn't know. So hopefully, using my photos, I can let the young people to know all these masters.
Well, let's talk about some of these great masters, because many of our audience coming from maybe all over the world might not necessarily know their names, but certainly know their work. For example, Professor Xu Yuanchong.
He's a very famous translator. He won the World Class Translation Prize recently, 2014. He did a lot of translation for Chinese traditional poetry and literature. For example, like Tao Te Ching, Chu Ci, Amulet, the story of West Chamber. A lot of them, yeah.
All of these are huge names in Chinese literature history.
Yeah, we learned that since we were a child.
So what was it like for you to go there and meet him? Where did you meet him?
I met him in a hospital.
Really?
Yeah, he broke his leg in the Mid-Moon Festival. He was riding a bicycle in the campus, and he
97 years old riding a bicycle?
Yeah, it's very dangerous. Everybody talks about that, but he wouldn't follow the rules. You know, he always care about like what he cares. Like for his books, his writing, he's very productive. He did I think thousands of translations in his life. He worked for over 60 years.
林徽因走徐志摩的故乡过，看到见景生情呐、一样是明月，一样是满山灯火，只有人不见梦时的瓜子。
When you took the photo of him, you didn't show much of his sentimental side.
Yeah, I think my photos are kind of subjective, I think, because I want to create something strange but familiar. The people you are familiar, but the image itself is kind of strange. You haven't seen that person in that situation before, but I think that's a new perspective of the visual information.
Well, yeah. Professor Xu, even though he's very charismatic, but certainly, I mean, he's a very warm person, right? He's very inviting in a way, but there are others who are not necessarily so, who have very different personalities when you are filming them, when you are taking photos of them.
Oh, for example, like Li Ning.
One of the most well-known Chinese economists.
He only gave me 15 minutes in his home. It was a Saturday, only 15 minutes in the Saturday afternoon. And before I came into his home, he called me and said, "Oh, faster, faster."
Like the Chinese economy, faster, faster.
Faster, yeah. Time is money. And so I was kind of nervous actually, because I got to flash and all the equipments, and I have to set up and took the photo. And but I did it. He looks strict in my photo, and that's how I feel about him. Yeah. So I think that's a contrast between him and Mr. Xu.
Well, there are others that you also took photo of. For example, these days China has been talking about, you know, what is the future of Chinese chip making.
And there is a couple who are chip makers, and they're I would say they are the best chip maker in China. Wang Yangyuan and Yang Fuqing. Especially Yang Fuqing, she really cares about her look in the image. After the shooting, she even do the post-production with me in the printing company to adjust the hue and the saturations for the photos, because she cares about the.
Quite a dominating person, I guess.
Exactly, she's trying to be perfect in all situations.
Did you like the eventual hue and the color that she chose?
I think I like it. But because I set up the settings, so actually she only did some change in her face, so I think it's good.
Academics, when they are doing scientific research, not many people would assume that they would be, you know, necessarily that much care about how they look in front of the public, but actually they do.
Yeah, they do.
But many wonder, you know, 26 great masters in their own field. Why is this project so important to you? Why photographs so important to you?
Me and our masters are all from different generations. I think the contrast is the most interesting thing in this project. My generation is different. We are visual people, and we prefer to check the image first, and that's the way we know people, actually.
Yeah. Do you think eventually people will be looking at the works that these great masters have been doing?
I think it's a process. Hopefully, after they got interested in my pictures, photos, they got a chance to look at their works in the end. And I think it's a process. The first thing I would like to do is to draw their attention on all those masters.
Welcome back. The real China lies beyond the Euro stereotypes portrayed in sensational reporting. It's important to ask, what is the country really like? What are the Chinese really thinking? And what do the youth, the young people in China, really aspire to be? Even though those questions have been asked by generations of China hands, they have become more relevant when China opens up to the world today. No wonder Zach, a young American of the post-90s generation, set the record straight. After living and working in China, he put his life stories, including the nuanced views of Chinese young peers, into a book entitled Young China: How the Restless Generation in China Will Change Their Country and the World. It's an inside look at China's post-90s generation, which kept on dreaming and thriving. I invited Zach to CGTN for a chat. We started by talking about the so-called colored lens that some use when they see China. Zach, what a pleasure to have you on CGTN.
Thank you so much for having me, Wei.
But you know, from time to time people question whether everybody understand the narrative about China.
Yeah.
Is the real narrative. Have you been consciously thinking about that question?
There's two different audiences. There's the narrative that we know from here in Beijing, and that's an elite narrative that follows the China narrative every day. And then there's the rest of the world. The rest of the world sees young people as little emperors, spoiled brats. They don't see them as incredibly talented students, incredibly talented thinkers, increasingly innovative young people. They don't see that. They see little emperors. They don't see China as an increasingly innovative space. They don't see people as independent thinkers. They see people as part of a large whole. Even the cover of my book, the first picture that my publisher showed me was a group of Chinese kids all in student gear. All from a distance, everyone looking more or less the same. They see a group, a mass of people. They don't see individuals. So to have a young person on the front of the cover who's thoughtful, who's thinking about the world, who's alone in a big city, in the West, outside of China, that's a new narrative, focusing on the individual. The born after 90 generation in particular is known as the me generation.
Right.
It's the first generation not as focused on the collective and thinking about, what do I want? What do I dream of? What do I want for my family? That's a different set of considerations.
Very interesting. On the other hand, there's the issue of, the party, the state, and the individual in China. What is it like, that relationship?
I mean, this young generation grew up open-minded. They grew up with the internet. They grew up watching, it's not just studying Western history. I have friends who can quote How I Met Your Mother, Barney from How I Met Your Mother, but also Martin Luther King Jr. They know our history. They've studied the West. They are far more fluent in our culture than we are of China, easily. 1/3 of all students studying abroad in America are from China. 2/3 of all passport holders in China are under the age of 37. That's the born after 80 and born after 90.
Right.
So this young generation has seen the world. And more than any other generation in Chinese history, they recognize that, everywhere has problems. Much more so even than the older generation. They recognize that America isn't that great. And China has its problems too, but at least it's getting stuff done. And it's getting stuff done at a rate that provides them personally a better opportunity than being somewhere else. That's powerful.
But as you may know, when China is getting much wealthier than it used to be, the growth rate is likely to slow down.
Yeah.
So is the changes of families and of life for the better. That's also likely to slow down. Do you think if they can take it?
I think this pride is more resilient than we give it credit for. I think young people are recognizing that it can be cool to be Chinese. It could be, you know, they can innovate internationally with the best of folks. When Jack Ma went to go have the largest IPO in the world from a creative industry in New York, that's a message to young Chinese who had before thought only Westerners or Steve Jobs can be innovative, that, hey, we can be innovative too. You're seeing right now that young people are willing to sort of stand shoulder to shoulder internationally. The older generation didn't have that same sort of pride, that belief in the strength of not just China as a country, but Chinese as individuals.
But now China and the United States, it's apparently in some kind of war, shall we say, trade war even. Do you think the Chinese young people that you've been interacting with, I'm sure during your book tour and stuff, you've been talking to them, your friends as well. What do they think about that?
People are recognizing is that now there's parity between the two countries. 15 years ago, if you were to say China and America are in a battle of equals, people would have rolled their eyes. That wasn't the case. There's recently on the Chinese internet, there's been a funny World Cup joke, which is 美中不足. It's an old saying that means within something perfect there is a blemish or an imperfection. But literally it means America and China don't play soccer. And so the joke is that Americans and Chinese, they're two strong, powerful countries. We just sit back and watch other people entertain us. But what that, you know...
So of course, that's just a joke.
It's a joke, but what it sort of suggests underneath is right now that there are these two countries who are equals. And I think that's what this young generation believes.
Despite changes, there are always things uniquely Chinese that pull back people to a lifelong commitment in China. The food is a big part of it. Zach, after living in Sichuan, best known in the world for its hot and spicy cuisine, was excited to tell me about all the magic in the dishes. That's also a peek into the real life in Middle China. Chengdu is a place really you can enjoy yourself.
Absolutely.
Great food, great atmosphere. People just take it easy, as they say. I got two questions for you about Chengdu. First is, what's your favorite food?
First is 烤鱼. It's barbecued fish technically, but it's barbecued fish and then it's immersed in oil, and that oil is sort of slow cooked with herbs and spices. You have potato. You can add a lot of different stuff, and it's served in a hot pan. There's nothing like it that we have back home.
Going to 烤鱼 together with friends, it's really a big way for young people to hang out in Chengdu or in other cities across China.
Absolutely. My friends and I make jokes about how the older generation in China used to focus on eating bitter, right? 吃苦. And the joke now is that everyone in China just eats hot pot. On one hand, you have the older generation working hard and having to do delayed gratification. Chengdu is a great example of the want to 活在当下, to live in the moment. One of our favorite toasts in Chengdu is 今朝有酒,今朝醉.
Oh, really? You guys say that?
Today we have booze, so today we drink. It's a commitment to being here now.
The other thing is, what were you there for?
It felt like the world was getting China wrong, often focusing on old China versus young China. And by that, I don't just mean age. I don't just mean older people versus younger people. I mean, there's an older perception of China, you know, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that isn't China today.
You wrote about young people, particularly young boys in China, thinking about their future, think about marriage and the real estate. And what is exactly the relationship among all of these phenomena?
China's property market is propped up on a marriage market. Different than anywhere else in the world, so many of the young people I talked to, particularly men, described the frustration of having to own property in order to be seen an eligible bachelor, in order to get married. It was that, you know, the ability to own property that allowed people to have allowed not just the woman in the relationship, but more their parents, that feeling of safety, that feeling of security. What that means is that they often have to borrow from their grandparents. They have to borrow from their parents. So you get this entire family structure saving money to support their child in order to buy an apartment. I think you're having some people bend to the pressure. I think you're having other people reinvent the wheel. When you look at places like Shenzhen, when you look at people, especially in the startup community, they're not buying apartments anymore because it doesn't make sense. The IMF recently had a report that came out that said 7 out of 10 of the least livable cities in the world in terms of housing market prices are in China.
Right.
7 out of 10. So if you're a business person, you know that that doesn't make economic sense. But because there's a cultural imperative, young people are still buying it.
So how is that having an impact, the so-called divide or gap of wealth having on the young people? Have you met people from very different social groups?
So one of the interesting things about being a foreigner in China, especially when you speak Chinese, is you can sort of hang out with a lot of different people.
Yeah.
So I've been on the side of the road eating shaokao with, 15 kuai a person, and a Maserati will go by, and watching the faces of my friends change when they see that type of wealth, realizing that they're never going to be able to get that. That's something that they dream of. It's never going to happen for them. I've had that experience. The other experience, though, I've been in that Maserati with one of these ultra-rich young Chinese people, watching people on the side of the street eating shaokao. And that person in the Maserati is describing to me how lonely they are. Because China has developed so fast, and really there's no international comparison for what China has achieved, especially in the last 27 or 28 years in my lifetime, that China's extremes are further apart, far further apart.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.